The morning Marcus announced he wanted a divorce, Sophia was drinking coffee on the terrace. It was a Thursday, unremarkable in every way except for the fact that her entire world shifted on its axis in the span of 3 minutes. "I've been thinking about this for months," Marcus said, his tone holding the same clinical precision he used in business meetings. "We're not working anymore. Haven't been for a long time. I think the most mature thing we can do is acknowledge it and move forward separately." Sophia set her coffee cup down slowly, her hands steadier than her heart. She had known this was coming. She had felt it in the spaces between them, in the way his touch had become obligatory rather than affectionate. But knowing something and hearing it spoken aloud were two entirely different experiences. "I've already spoken with my legal team," he continued, pulling out his phone to reference notes. "We'll keep things simple and amicable. You'll be taken care of course. I'm not heartless. But I think a clean break is best for both of us." The phrase, "I'll take care of you," landed like a slap. As if she were a child, a pet, a dependent who needed his benevolence to survive. Sophia felt something crystallize inside her, not anger, but clarity. A cold, sharp understanding of exactly how small he had made her, and how completely she had allowed it. "Give me 2 days," she said quietly. Marcus looked surprised, as if he had expected tears, arguments, desperation. Perhaps he had hoped for it, as it would have confirmed his narrative, that she needed him, that his leaving was a generous act, that he was the one who had sustained their entire lives. Sophia spent those 2 days on the phone with Rachel, the lawyer she had quietly been consulting for the past 8 months. Rachel had warned her this might happen. Rachel had suggested she protect herself with documentation and legal agreements, but Sophia had resisted, hoping, against reason and evidence, that things might improve, that Marcus might choose to see her again. Now Sophia made the decision that would change everything. She pulled out the document that had been sitting in a secure digital folder, unsigned by Marcus but reviewed and approved by Rachel, a comprehensive spousal agreement drafted retroactively, one that Sophia needed Marcus to sign voluntarily or that she could present to the court as evidence of her contributions and sacrifices. The agreement was detailed and devastating in its specificity. It documented Sophia's abandoned career, 2 publications she had been preparing before marriage, the Marine Institute position she had deferred and eventually lost, the conservation center she had begun planning but never realized. It calculated the economic value of her contributions to Marcus's business success, the countless nights she had listened to his struggles and provided strategic advice, the decisions she had talked him through, the network of contacts she had leveraged on his behalf without credit or compensation. It detailed her emotional labor, the therapy sessions she had attended to manage stress from his infidelities, minor, but they had happened, his mood swings during business crises, his need for constant validation of his importance. It accounted for the household management she had orchestrated flawlessly, the social calendar she had maintained, the dinners she had hosted for investors, the image she had constructed as the perfect accessory to his success. Most importantly, it stipulated that should they divorce, Marcus would be responsible not just for standard spousal support, but for funding the Marine Conservation Center Sophia had never been allowed to build. He would contribute to her re-entry into research, covering her education costs if she chose to pursue advanced degrees. He would provide financial support until she could rebuild a career that his marriage had effectively derailed. Rachel had been cautious about some of the terms. "It's aggressive," she had said. "But it's honest. Every item in here is provable, documented, or has witnesses. The question is whether you want to present it to him privately or let the courts decide." Sophia chose the private approach first, a courtesy Marcus didn't deserve but that she would grant herself for the sake of her own dignity. When Marcus returned to the penthouse that evening, Sophia was waiting in the living room. She had prepared carefully, dressed impeccably, composed entirely. She handed him the document with a steady hand. "I'm going to make this easier for you," she said, her voice cool and professional. "This is a spousal agreement that documents my contributions to our marriage and the financial arrangements that will accompany our separation. If you sign it, we can move forward without prolonged court battles. If you don't, Rachel, my lawyer, will present evidence of everything outlined here to the court, and they will decide." Marcus flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation to something that looked almost like fear. "This is insane," he said. "You can't just. This isn't how divorce works." "Actually," Sophia replied, It's exactly how it works when someone has been systematically undervalued and had their labor and sacrifices converted into someone else's success. You wanted to leave feeling victorious, thinking you could simply step away from our marriage the way you step away from failed business ventures. But I'm not a failed venture, Marcus. I'm a person you promised to honor, and I've documented exactly how thoroughly you failed to do that. She watched his face as he continued reading, watched him process the reality that his departure would not be the clean escape he had imagined. Watched him begin to understand that the woman he had dismissed as decorative and dependent had been protecting her own interests all along. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted. It wasn't yet understanding or regret, but it was something, a crack in the armor of his certainty. He had believed he had won by deciding to leave. He was beginning to realize that winning and losing were more complicated than he had assumed. "I need time to review this with my lawyers," he said finally, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. "Of course," Sophia replied. "But Marcus, every day you delay signing, the legal fees you'll have to pay increase. And every day you delay, you're proving that you still don't understand why that agreement exists in the first place." That night, Marcus slept in the guest room. Sophia lay in their bed, which was now essentially hers alone, and felt the first stirrings of something she had thought were dead, hope. Not hope that they would reconcile, but hope that she was finally taking her own life seriously again. 3 weeks into the legal proceedings, Marcus sat in his office on the 48th floor and found himself unable to concentrate. His company was performing well, better than ever, in fact. His latest product launch had exceeded projections. His board members praised his leadership. By every external measure, he was winning. Yet he felt like he was drowning. The first crack in his armor came when he was reviewing documents in preparation for mediation. His lawyer had compiled files on Sophia's career history, and Marcus found himself reading about a woman he realized he barely knew. There were her published papers on coral bleaching and thermal adaptation, sophisticated, groundbreaking work that he had nodded along to without ever truly understanding. There were emails from university professors offering her positions, opportunities she had turned down. There was a business plan for her conservation center, detailed and realistic, with market research and fundraising strategies that showed intelligence and vision. Marcus had known in abstract that Sophia had deferred her career, but he had never truly understood what that meant. He had never calculated the cost. He had never considered that her sacrifice wasn't just a temporary pause but a permanent divergence from the trajectory she had been on. That evening, against his better judgment, he called his older brother Anil, the one family member who had the audacity to speak honestly to him. "She's destroying me," Marcus said without preamble. "Her lawyer has filed this agreement that claims I owe her for everything. My advice, my emotional support, household management. It's absurd." Anil was quiet for a moment. "Did you provide those things?" "Of course, but—" "And did she provide them to you?" Marcus thought about the late-night conversations when he had been panicking over funding rounds, when Sophia had talked him down from despair. He thought about the investor he had met through her contact, a meeting that had led to crucial early capital. He thought about coming home in the darkest moments of his career and finding Sophia had prepared the space so carefully, so thoughtfully, that he could simply exist without pretense. "Yes," he admitted. "But that's what partners do." "Exactly," Anil said. "And partners compensate each other when one person's life trajectory becomes subordinated to the other's. You're not angry because she's asking for too much, Marcus. You're angry because you're realizing what you cost her, and that cost is expensive when you finally have to pay it." After he hung up, Marcus sat in his apartment, the apartment where Sophia was no longer really living, though she hadn't yet moved out. She had taken her presence with her though, clearing out the closet, removing her books, making the space emptier by her absence. He walked through the rooms and tried to see them the way she might have. The living room where they had hosted those investor dinners. Where had Sophia been in those moments? He remembered her laugh at a table discussion, genuine and bright, and then he remembered something else. Marcus's boss, someone important, interrupting her mid-sentence to ask Marcus a question. Marcus had responded, and Sophia's comment had been forgotten. How many times had that happened? How many of her thoughts, her insights, her presence had been erased by his need to be the central figure? He found himself in the home office, looking at the photographs on the shelves. There was one of Sophia at her university graduation, holding her diploma with radiant pride. There was another from a diving expedition, her in full gear, at ease in a way he had rarely seen her since marriage. There was a third from their wedding day, both of them luminous with hope. When had she stopped looking like that? When had she begun to seem diminished? Marcus pulled up his email and found the folder where Sophia had archived information about the Conservation Center project. He had known she was researching it once, but he had dismissed it as a hobby, something to keep her occupied while he built his empire. Now, reading through the detailed files, he saw what he had missed. This wasn't a hobby. This was her dream, the equivalent of his vision for his company. How would he feel if Sophia had asked him to abandon his business for her sake? If she had needed him to be her supporting player while she took center stage? He would have felt suffocated. He would have felt betrayed. Yet that was precisely what he had done to her. The realization didn't come as a dramatic epiphany but as a slow, aching recognition. And with it came memories he had been too distracted or too proud to fully acknowledge. He remembered their honeymoon in Costa Rica, where Sophia had spent hours identifying species of sea life while Marcus had checked emails on his phone. He remembered her mentioning casually that the hotel was hosting a marine conservation lecture, and Marcus suggesting they skip it so they could rest. He remembered the disappointment that had flickered across her face before she had agreed. He remembered her turning down the position at the Marine Institute because his company needed her to attend a crucial conference on the same week. He remembered her stopping talk of the Conservation Center, not because he explicitly forbade it, but because every time she brought it up, he was busy, stressed, needed her to focus on something he deemed more immediate. He remembered, with sharp clarity, a moment about 2 years into their marriage. Sophia had been on the phone with her mentor, and Marcus had heard her say, "I'm not sure anymore if I'm cut out for this kind of work. Maybe my talents are better suited to supporting Marcus's vision." The mentor had said something he couldn't quite hear, and Sophia had laughed in that hollow way she did now, a laugh that contained no real joy. Marcus had never questioned whether Sophia actually believed that. He had simply felt relieved that her ambitions were recalibrating to align with his own. Now, sitting in the office she had made beautiful without his noticing, Marcus began to understand the document she had presented to him differently. It wasn't vindictive. It was honest. Every item, every claim, was a reflection of something real that he had taken and never repaid. The mediation session was scheduled for the following week. Marcus knew he should strategize with his lawyers, find ways to minimize his liability, prove that some of her claims were exaggerated. But as he sat with that knowledge, he realized he didn't want to. For the first time in years, Marcus wanted to truly listen to his wife. The penthouse on the 42nd floor glowed with the soft amber of evening light, but Sophia felt cold despite the temperature-controlled perfection of their Manhattan apartment. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Hudson River curve like a dark ribbon through the city below, and wondered when she had stopped feeling alive. Marcus would be home soon, or rather, he would arrive at the apartment where they technically lived together, though they had become ghosts passing through each other's days. She could hear the notification on her phone, another email from his assistant confirming he would be late again. There would be apologies tomorrow, flowers the day after, and promises of a weekend getaway that would inevitably be cancelled for an emergency board meeting. 5 years ago, Sophia had been different. She had worn her passion like armor, a young marine biologist with published research on coral reef restoration, offers from 3 prestigious institutions, and a dream of opening a conservation center where she could teach others to fall in love with the ocean the way she had. She had met Marcus at a charity gala, both of them volunteers for an environmental nonprofit, both glowing with purpose. He had been captivating then too, but in a different way. His ambition hadn't yet eclipsed his warmth. He had listened to her talk about her research for hours, asked intelligent questions, imagined with her what her conservation center might look like. "We'll build something meaningful together," he had whispered during their 3rd date, and Sophia had believed him. Marriage had felt inevitable. The wedding itself was tasteful and small, just close friends and family in a garden ceremony. Sophia wore her mother's vintage lace dress, and Marcus had cried when she walked toward him. She remembered thinking, "This is it. This is the beginning of our real life." But real life, she discovered, meant something different to Marcus. Within months, He had secured funding for a major expansion of his tech firm, and the opportunity demanded everything: his time, his mental energy, his presence. Sophia had deferred her acceptance to the Marine Institute. Just for a year, she had told herself. Once things settled down, she had promised her mentor. Things never settled. Instead, they accelerated. Marcus's company grew exponentially, and with it, his need for her to be the perfect complement to his public image, the beautiful, articulate wife who smiled at fundraisers and donor events. Sophia attended galas where she stood beside him, watching him command rooms with his vision, while her own visions faded like watercolors left in the sun. She had tried to maintain her work, taking on consulting projects from home, publishing smaller papers, attending occasional conferences. But Marcus had a way of needing her most urgently on those exact days. A client crisis. A family dinner with investors. A moment when he needed her voice to boost his confidence before a major pitch. Slowly, without a conscious decision being made, Sophia had stepped back. She had told herself it was temporary. She had told herself that supporting his dream was noble, that partnership meant sacrifice, that love meant putting his ambitions first. She had told herself many things, each a small stone added to the wall between her and the woman she had been. Now, at 36, Sophia felt like she was drowning in the shallow end of her own life. She had no current research, no active projects, no identity beyond Marcus's wife. The woman who had once spoken at conferences now struggled to remember the last meaningful conversation she had initiated. The apartment door opened, and Marcus appeared, suit still crisp despite the hour, phone in hand, eyes already on the screen. He kissed her cheek automatically, a gesture without presence. "How was your day?" she asked, knowing the answer would take the rest of dinner. "Brutal," he said, already moving toward his home office. "I need to review contracts tonight. Don't wait up." Sophia stood alone in the kitchen, in their perfect apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life that looked enviable from the outside but felt like imprisonment from within. She pulled out her laptop and opened a file she had been building in secret, a document her lawyer had drafted months ago, a spousal agreement that listed everything Marcus owed her, everything he had taken, and everything he would owe if he ever decided he was done. She didn't know why she was keeping it. Maybe it was insurance. Maybe it was the last way she knew to assert her own value. Maybe it was a shadow version of the dream she had given up, not a future she wanted, but one that would ensure she couldn't disappear entirely. The ocean, she thought, remembering her research, remembers every creature that passes through it, every coral that dies, every small change in temperature. Nothing truly disappears. Even when we stop looking, it leaves traces. Sophia closed the laptop and listened to Marcus talking on the phone in the next room, his voice animated with excitement about quarterly projections and market penetration, words that felt like a foreign language to her now. She wondered if he could still remember the person he had been when they met, the one who had asked about her dreams as if they mattered. She wondered if she could remember it either. Life lesson embedded. We often sacrifice our own identity in relationships without recognizing when sacrifice becomes self-abandonment. True partnership requires both people to pursue meaningful work and maintain their individual identity, not one person stepping into shadow while the other steps into light.
بعد 3 أشهر من جلسة المحكمة، كانت شركة الحج قد تحولت بالكامل. المبنى نفسه بقي، لكن الروح التي بداخله تغيرت تماما. السرة جلست في مكتب والدها الآن، لا تجلس على كرسي الملك، بل على كرسي الخدمة. على جدران المكتب معلقة صورة والدها، ابتسامته تشع نحوها كل يوم. أول قرار اتخذته سرة بعد استعادة السيطرة الكاملة كان إنشاء صندوق تطوير الموارد البشرية. لكل موظف راتب جديد، تأمين صحي أفضل، وفرصة للتطور والتعليم المستمر. الموظفون الذين كانوا يعملون بصمت لسنوات بدأوا يشعرون بالقيمة. نحن نبني شركة، لا نحكم إمبراطورية، قالت سرة في اجتماع إداري كبير. والفرق بينهما أن الشركة تعتني بناسها. عينت نائبة تنفيذية امرأة قوية تدعى ريم العزيز، خريجة من أفضل الجامعات العالمية. ريم كانت تعمل في الشركة منذ 8 سنوات، لكن تحت إدارة خالد لم تأخذ فرصة أبدا. الآن، مع سرة، بدأت ريم تستعيد ثقتها بنفسها. كانت تعرف أن سرة ترى فيها شريكة وليس مجرد موظفة. ماذا كان ينقصني في الماضي؟ سألت ريم سرة ذات مرة وهما تعملان متأخرا في المكتب. لا شيء كان ينقصك. كان ينقص الشركة القيادة الصحيحة. خالد كان يخاف من النساء القويات. كان يريدهن ضعيفات. ريم ابتسمت حزينا. كم امرأة موهوبة هدرت قدراتها بسبب رجل واحد. الكثير. لكننا سنصلح هذا الآن. في الأسابيع التالية بدأت سرة بمشروع جديد. اتصلت بالدكتورة نور الحربي والشيخ محمد لدعج والمستثمرين القدماء الآخرين. اقترحت عليهم شيئا لم يتوقعوه: توسيع الشركة عالميا. أريد أن أفتح فروعا جديدة في دول خليجية أخرى، قالت سرة في اجتماع مع المجلس الاستشاري. لا لزيادة الأرباح فقط، لكن لنشر القيم التي بناها والدي. إن الثروة الحقيقية ليست في المال، بل في الأثر الإيجابي الذي تتركه على المجتمع. الشيخ محمد الذي كان عمره الآن قاربا 70 نهض من مقعده ببطء، وضع يده على كتف سرة. والدك كان يحلم بهذا، قال، صوته يرتجف قليلا. أنت ترينها بنفس العيون التي كان يراها بها. في هذه الأثناء خالد الناصر كان يعيش أياما مختلفة جدا. بعد أن فقد الفرصة للسيطرة على شركة الحج، حاول الاستثمار في مشاريع أخرى، لكن سمعته تحطمت. كل شخص في الأوساط الاقتصادية كان يعرف قصته. الرجل الذي حاول خداع امرأة هادئة واكتشف أنها وريثة إمبراطورية. ليلى تركت. قالت لا تريد أن تكون زوجة رجل بلا سمعة. شعرت أنه خسر كل شيء. خالد حاول مرارا الاقتراب من سرة، ليس لاستعادة الشركة بل للاعتذار، لكن سرة كانت دائما هادئة وحازمة. الاعتذارات لا تمسح الاستهزاء، يمكنك فقط أن تتعلم من الأخطاء. حتى أنها لم تحاول تدميره قانونيا أو ماليا بعد ذلك. لم تنتقم، فقد تركته يواجه عواقب أفعاله الطبيعية. سنة واحدة بعد الجلسة قررت سرة إطلاق مؤسسة خاصة تحت اسم والدها، مؤسسة الدكتور فهد للتمكين الاقتصادي للنساء. الهدف كان تدريب النساء الشابات على الاستقلالية المالية، إدارة الأعمال، والثقة بالنفس. في حفل الافتتاح دعت سرة مئات النساء. قفت على المسرح وللمرة الأولى رفعت صوتها حقا. كم مرة قيل لنا أننا ضعيفات لأننا هادئات؟ كم مرة حكمنا على أنفسنا لأننا لم نتحدث بصوت عال؟ قالت، نظرتها شاملة لكل امرأة في القاعة. أنا أخبركن شيئا، الصمت ليس ضعفا. الصمت هو فرصة لنستمع، لنراقب، ولنبني استراتيجية. القوة الحقيقية تأتي حين تختارين متى تتحدثين ومتى تصمتين. أثناء الخطاب لاحظت سرة وجها مألوفا في الصفوف الخلفية. خالد كان يستمع دون أن يتوقع أن تراه. عندما انتهت من حديثها نهضت للتحية الأخيرة، ورأته يغادر الحفل بهدوء. بعدها بقليل استقبلت رسالة نصية من خالد. أنا فهمت أخيرا. أعتذر عن كل ما حدث. أرجوك تقبلي اعتذاري. لا أتوقع المسامحة، لكنني أريد أن أعرفي أنني تعلمت الدرس. سرة قرأت الرسالة مرات عديدة، ثم كتبت ردها ببطء. شكرا على الاعتذار. لا أستطيع أن أسامحك لأن المسامحة تحتاج إلى وقت وجهد من طرفيك، لكن يمكنك أن تكون شاهدا على أن الناس يمكنهم أن يتغيروا. استخدم قصتك لتعليم الآخرين. هذا هو الانتقام الحقيقي، ليس الدمار بل التغيير والنمو. بعد سنتين من استعادة سرة للسيطرة على الشركة، كانت إمبراطورية الحج قد أصبحت أكثر من مجرد شركة استثمارية. كانت حركة، كانت بيان عن قيم مختلفة. فروع الحج الجديدة افتتحت في الإمارات والكويت والبحرين. كل فرع كان يتبع نفس الفلسفة: الاستثمار في الناس أولا، الأرباح ثانيا. الموظفون لم يكونوا أرقام على ورقة، كانوا شركاء في الرؤية. مؤسسة الدكتور فهد للتمكين الاقتصادي نمت بسرعة. في السنة الأولى دربت 300 امرأة. في السنة الثانية الرقم ارتفع إلى 1000. كل امرأة تخرجت من البرنامج بثقة جديدة بنفسها ومهارات عملية وشبكة دعم قوية. ريم العزيز، نائبة السيدة التنفيذية، أصبحت وجه البرنامج الحقيقي. كانت تقف على المسرح تتحدث عن تجربتها تحت قيادة خالد، كيف كانت تشعر بأن موهبتها لا تستحق الاهتمام، ثم كيف تغير كل شيء مع سرة. القيادة الصحيحة لا تخاف من الموهبة، قالت ريم في إحدى جلسات التدريب. القيادة الصحيحة تشجعها وتزرعها. كل امرأة في هذه الغرفة لديها قوة خفية. مهمتنا هنا أن نساعدكن على اكتشافها. سرة جلست في الصف الخلفي تستمع. كانت فخورة بريم، لكنها لم تتدخل. هذا كان الفرق. سرة لم تحتج للظهور كل وقت. كانت راضية بأن تكون الصوت الهادئ خلف الحركة. في مكتبها الخاص احتفظت سرة بصورة والدها. احتفظت أيضا برسالة كتبها لها قبل وفاته. فتحتها مرة واحدة فقط في السنة، دائما في عيد ميلادها. الرسالة كانت قصيرة: يا ابنتي الحبيبة، إذا كنت تقرأين هذه الرسالة فقد غادرت العالم، لكن أريدك أن تعرفي أنني لم أكن قلقا على الشركة. الشركة مجرد حجر. ما قلقني هو أنك ستفهمي الفرق بين السلطة والقوة. السلطة هي ما تملكين، القوة هي ما تختارين فعله بما تملكين. أنا اخترت السلطة لفترة طويلة، لكن أتمنى أن تختاري أنت القوة. أحبك، أبوك. كل مرة تقرأ سرة هذه الرسالة تشعر بأن والدها بجانبها. في الحفل الذي أقيم لتكريم سرة كامرأة أعمال متميزة، وقفت على المسرح تستقبل جوائز وشهادات تقدير، لكن حديثها الأخير كان للموظفين والعاملين معها. أنا لم أبني هذا وحدي، قالت سرة. والدي بنى الأساس. الموظفون الصادقون بنوا الجدران. ريم بنت السقف. أنا فقط اخترت أن أضع نافذة هنا ونافذة هناك لتدخل أشعة الشمس. الحضور صفقوا، لكن سرة لم تبتسم ابتسامة منتصرة أو غرور. ابتسمت ابتسامة هادئة، ابتسامة من تعرف قيمتها بالفعل. بعد الحفل التقيا خالد الناصر بسرة في الممر. كانت هذه المرة الأولى منذ سنة كاملة التقيانهما. مبروك، قال خالد ببساطة. شكرا، ردت سرة. أنا سمعت عن برنامج التمكين، أنا فخور بك. نظرت إليه سرة. هناك شيء مختلف فيه الآن. لم يكن الثقة الزائفة من قبل، كان هناك تواضع حقيقي. وأنا سمعت أنك بدأت برنامج إرشاد لرجال الأعمال الشباب، قالت سرة، تعلمهم أن الاحترام والقيم أهم من الأرباح. أنا لم أعتذر لك بشكل صحيح من قبل، قال خالد. أنا آسف سرة، آسف حقا. أنا أعرف أنك آسف، وأنا أقبل اعتذارك، لكنني لا أستطيع أن أعطيك مسامحة كاملة. المسامحة تحتاج إلى وقت، لكن يمكنك أن تثبت أنك تغيرت من خلال أفعالك. ابتسم خالد، ابتسامة حزينة، لكنها كانت ابتسامة من يفهم الآن. أنا سأثبت لك ذلك، قال. مشت سرة، لم تنظر للخلف، كانت مشغولة بالنظر للأمام. في المنزل جلست سرة على شرفتها مثل تلك الليلة قبل سنتين، لكن هذه المرة لم تكن تشعر بالخوف أو الترقب، كانت تشعر بالسلام. السلام الذي يأتي من معرفة أنك فعلت ما كان صحيحا. الرياض أضاءت أمامها، مدينة سوداء من الأسفل، مليئة بالأضواء من الأعلى، كل نافذة عمارة تمثل شخصا، حياة، أحلام. وفي كل مكان كانت هناك نساء يتعلمن أن يصرخن بهدوء، نساء يكتشفن أن الصمت يمكن أن يكون صراخا.